Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into what is honestly one of the most chaotic, misunderstood, and frankly, headache-inducing areas of modern product development. Yep, we're talking about documentation. Specifically, we're going to be demystifying two massive acronyms that completely rule the product world, the BRD and the PRD. So let's just jump right in and get some much-needed clarity on this.
I want to kick things off by asking a question that literally plagues so many cross-functional delivery units today. Are a BRD and a PRD the exact same thing? Well, I'll give you a massive hint here. If you're treating them like they are, you're absolutely setting your team up for a whole lot of late-night scrambling and frustration.
Because the reality in most organizations often feels exactly like this tangled mess. Two documents, one product, endless confusion. Look, let me just emphatically shut this down right out of the gate. These are two completely distinct documents. They serve entirely different purposes, and treating them interchangeably, that is what causes absolute chaos in your development lifecycle. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the great document confusion. Then, we'll define the why with the BRD and the how with the PRD. After that, we'll put them head-to-head, map out how to survive the product lifecycle, and finally wrap up with avoiding some really common documentation mistakes.
Starting off with Section 1, the great document confusion, why product teams get lost in the chaos.
Picture this. Your engineer just messaged you on Slack, "Hey, what are the specs for the new checkout flow?" We have all been there, right? That sudden wave of panic when an engineer asks for technical specs, while at the exact same time your stakeholders are demanding features that were totally out of scope. You're sitting there with a dozen scattered user stories, a half-finished prototype, a few messy meeting notes, and suddenly you're expected to have this perfectly cohesive plan. It's incredibly overwhelming.
And you know, a single misstep in documentation just cascades into these massive, massive problems. When teams treat the BRD and PRD as interchangeable, it's a total recipe for disaster. You wind up with misaligned stakeholders. You've got business leaders hunting for ROI and engineers looking for API endpoints in the exact same document. It makes no sense. And that inevitably leads to endless scope creep because the boundaries just were never clearly drawn. Next thing you know, you're building features for all the wrong reasons because the core business problem was never actually codified. Oh, and let's not forget the classic trap of relying on those dusty, 100-page waterfall tomes that literally nobody ever reads. We've got to break away from all of this and align with modern agile realities where documentation is actually living, focused, and purposeful.
All right, moving to Section 2, BRD, defining the why, the strategic business case.
So, what actually is a business requirements document, or BRD? At its core, it is a strategic contract that captures the why behind an initiative. Before a single solution is designed, before any feature is even scoped, the BRD lays down the foundational business problems, the stakeholder expectations, and the expected outcomes. Basically, it justifies why this specific initiative matters to the company right now.
Now, when you break a BRD down, you'll notice it is not about software specs at all. It is entirely about business value. You start with a crystal clear business problem statement, like, what exact pain are we trying to solve here? Then you lay out objectives and expected outcomes, but framed strictly in terms of real business impact. You'll also define stakeholder roles and authority, who's actually making the final call, and crucially, a truly great BRD sets firm scope boundaries. It literally states what is explicitly out of scope. Let me tell you, that is an absolute superpower for preventing feature bloat. Finally, it outlines success metrics. How are we going to measure business value once this whole thing is done? This document is exactly how teams justify their investment decisions and get leadership aligned before anyone executes a single task.
Let's look at Section 3, PRD, defining the how, the execution solution.
Okay, so let's clearly define the PRD. The best way to think about it is this anchor concept. If the BRD is the why, the PRD is absolutely the how and the what. A product requirements document is a living, breathing document. It translates all that high-level business intent into actual product behavior, user workflows, and feature-level execution requirements for your delivery teams. This is where big-picture strategy morphs into something engineering can actually build and design can actually spec out.
Getting down into the practical weeds here, a PRD is hyper-focused on execution. You'll see target user personas or actors, ensuring the team knows exactly who they're building this for. You'll document problem scenarios, but specifically from the user's perspective to keep things focused on actual pain points. Then comes the real meat of the document, the detailed feature requirements, step-by-step workflows, and exactly how the system needs to handle tricky edge cases or error states. And, super importantly, it includes acceptance criteria for QA and release. Ultimately, the PRD acts as the primary working document to stop engineers and designers from making misaligned assumptions on their own. It just brings crystal clear execution clarity to the whole team.
Which brings us to Section 4, head-to-head BRD versus PRD, spotting the vital differences.
These two documents operate at entirely different altitudes, and they serve completely different people. Look at the audience. The BRD is written for stakeholders and leadership, while the PRD is squarely for product managers, designers, and engineers. When it comes to scope, the BRD is strategic and organizational. It's looking at the big picture of the company. The PRD, on the other hand, is execution level and highly feature-specific. And what about ownership? Usually, business analysts or senior stakeholders own the BRD, while product managers own the PRD. They're totally complementary, but they are distinctly different tools.
Let's ground this theory in a real-world example. Imagine we're building an approval workflow. In the BRD, remember that's the why, the goal is to reduce unauthorized project spend. The stakeholders are finance, the VP of engineering, and product. The constraint? It must be completed within 1 quarter. Now let's look at the PRD, the how, for that exact same initiative. That high-level goal translates into technical transition states, like moving from draft to pending to approved. The stakeholders translate directly into system user roles: requester, approver, admin, observer. And that constraint? It translates into a specific system edge case, like automatically blocking duplicate submissions. It is the exact same project, just viewed from totally different perspectives. On to Section 5, surviving the product lifecycle. How they work together sequentially.
Let me guide you chronologically through how this sequence actually plays out. Step 1, a business problem is identified, either out in the market or internally. Step 2, the BRD defines the goals and constraints needed to solve that specific problem. Step 3, the initiative gets officially approved by leadership based on that BRD. Step 4, the PRD is then created to define the specific solution requirements. And finally, Step 5, delivery planning begins. Do you see how naturally that works? The transition from BRD to PRD acts like a perfect baton pass in a relay race. It maintains strict alignment from that initial strategic idea all the way to final execution.
So, I really want to drive home this crucial point for you. Writing a PRD without a BRD is exactly like running a race without knowing where the finish line is. You might end up building a beautifully specified, highly technical solution, but you'll be building the right solution to the absolute wrong problem. You absolutely need that business case to anchor your entire product development process.
And finally, Section 6, avoiding common documentation mistakes, pitfalls that ruin alignment. Let's quickly run through some of the most common mistakes, because honestly, just recognizing them is half the battle. Number 1 is treating these documents as interchangeable and just merging them into one giant, unreadable file. As we've established, that serves nobody. Another huge mistake is writing PRDs before the business goals are even validated. If you do that, you're just building on pure assumptions. Sometimes teams keep the BRD way too vague, totally lacking any real success metrics. Or, on the flip side, they might overload the BRD with technical system details that just do not belong in a strategic document. Another frequent error is disconnecting your PRD requirements from the initial outcomes stated in the BRD. And lastly, letting either document become outdated and stale. I literally cannot emphasize this enough. A stale requirements document is actually worse than having no document at all. It just creates this false sense of confidence and leads your delivery teams completely astray.
Which brings us to the golden rule of documentation. Every single requirement in a PRD must be traceable back to a business outcome in the BRD. This traceability is exactly what prevents your delivery teams from just mindlessly ticking boxes. It ensures they're actually optimizing for real business impact. Literally every line of code should tie back to a concrete business goal.
To wrap things up today, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question to challenge how you're currently doing things. Is your team building great solutions for the wrong problems? Take a really hard look at your documentation workflow. Are you actually clearly separating the why from the how? Because by mastering the distinct roles of both the BRD and the PRD, you can completely revamp your workflow and guarantee that your team is always building the right thing for the right reasons. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep learning.